Good morning. I'd like to call the Village Board Budget Workshop to order for March 25th, 2023, to order with roll call, please.
McAlpine?
Here.
Cavelli?
Here.
Dudek?
Here.
Collier?
Here.
Thank you. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now moving to the open forum where the public is invited to make an issue-oriented comment on any matter of public concern not otherwise on the agenda. There's about 50 people here. Do you want to get in line? We'll go ahead and close open forum at 9:02. We'll get to the matter at hand, a review of our fiscal year 2023-2024 draft budget. Eric?
Thank you very much, Mayor. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this snowy Saturday for our second budget workshop. Today, we're going to be, as the Mayor mentioned, reviewing our proposed 2023-2024 budget. Our agenda today will include a summary of all of our funds, a little overview of the preliminary results for the current fiscal year, highlight of our current strategic objectives and how they relate to the budget, and of course I hate to be a spoiler for Kelly and for Courtney, but our proposed balanced budget for fiscal year 24. And then following that up with a little bit of a highlight of our capital projects and again, a recap of our summary of funds. And then finally, a little bit of a discussion related to our CIP. We did have a chance to look at some potential revenue options for the future, especially related to the capital side. So as we mentioned, we're on budget workshop number 2. After today's discussion, we'll gather feedback from the committee and the board, and then follow that up with a consideration for final approval on our April 4th village board meeting. I mentioned our strategic priorities. Much like our capital improvement program, our budget also follows and aligns with these priorities, and these priorities are very consistent with most municipalities, of course tweaked to being customized to fit Cary's needs. With relation to the fiscal year 24 budget, some of these priorities are, of course, stressed even more. Financial stability. As always, our budget is a very disciplined budget, and you'll see that as in the coming slides in our proposal today. Economic development. You'll see that our budget is highlighting and stressing the impacts and the effects of that moving forward for us. And, of course, supporting our aggressive infrastructure maintenance and our public safety. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our Finance Director, Kelly Brainerd, and Assistant to the Administrator, Courtney Sage, for the presentation.
Good morning. This first slide here, we have just a reminder of all the funds. There's 10 funds that comprise the Village of Cary. Today's discussion will largely focus on the general fund. So here we have our preliminary results for fiscal year 22-23. Projected to end the year of revenue with approximately $11.9 million. Projected expenditures, $13.2 million, which is a large number, but if the board will remember, last year was approved a $3.7 million transfer of the fund balance to get to that 45%. With these current projections, we're expected to end the year with a fund balance of $5.8 million, which is at 62%. So we will be proposing a $1.5 million transfer to capital fund to maintain that 45% unassigned fund balance number.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yep.
Sorry. Where does that 45% come from? How do we get to the minimum of 45%?
Yep, so that's the fund balance policy that's in place, and that's across the board.
So across the board, you mean across municipalities?
Yes, yep.
But some do have higher work.
Some do, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's up.
Yep.
The board can make a choice if they want to increase that or lower that, depending upon what their financial needs are.
Gotcha.
Here's a summary of some debt that the current village owns. We have the Municipal Center project. This is expected to be paid off fiscal year 2051, annual interest rate of 3%, and it is funded from the bond fund. Two other loans that we have out there, the IEPA loans, one for the phosphorus project, one for water and sanitation. The water and sand one is done next year, fiscal year 24. And then the phosphorus project, that one will be paid off by fiscal year 2039. And as a reminder to the board, very low interest rates of 1.56% on these. Okay, so here we have our proposed revenues for fiscal year 24. You'll see across the board there the years. So for fiscal 24, we're estimating approximately 10.5 million in revenues. So you'll see that is a little bit lower. The last 2 years we did receive those ARPA dollars, so keep that in mind of why those are a little bit higher. Even compared in that graph right there without the ARPA dollars, we are still projecting slightly lower revenues next year than this year. Mostly this is just due to conservative numbers from IML on the state revenue and the increased talks of a potential recession, the bank failures, the Fed raising the rates recently. So we did take a more conservative approach to budgeting for those revenues to be able to cover the expenses. Here's just a nice graph of some revenues by their category. Property tax is always the highest percentage of revenues, and then follows our state revenue of our income tax, sales tax, PPRT, state use tax, and then some others. Here we show our revenue trends over year to year. As you can see, good healthy uptick in revenues. Property taxes, slight increase from the board approval at the end of last year. Income tax remains strong. Sales tax as well remains to continue that upward trend. Here we have our proposed expenses for fiscal 24. So we're proposing approximately 12 million in expenses. This does represent an expense decrease. The majority of that decrease is the reduction in transfers. Last year we had 3.7. This year we're proposing 1.5 million. Some highlights to show in the budget for this year in expenditures. We increased the IT services to 5 days a week. 3 new positions that we're proposing with the patrol officer, an admin intern, and a custodian. We were able to move some of those additional IT costs and recurring professional services costs from the capital expenses to the general fund. And then, again, as I said, proposal of $1.5 million to the capital fund. Here we have a breakdown of our expenses by department. No surprise here, police, the biggest piece of the pie with 56%. Then we have public works, development, finance, admin, boards and commissions, legal, and our central services. Here's a breakdown of our expenses by category. No surprise here, we're service-based industry, so the largest piece will always be the personnel costs. So personnel wages, benefits, can even really throw in the professional services in there because that's the contractual services that the Village of Cary has. Here's a nice little graph of our personnel trends year to year. You can see in this graph 2014 we're at 72. By 2018 dropped down to 54. So we're slowly, increasing those personnel back. 2024 we're proposing 63, and that does include 3 additional positions, which is the patrol officer, the custodial position, and then 1 maintenance and utility worker. And now I'll throw it over to Courtney.
Thank you. So first, just wanted to highlight we have 2 new hires here on the screen. Of course, you've all met Dan Gardner, and while he is paid for out of the Capital Projects Fund, he is still a member of the Community Development team. And then we also have Nohara, who was hired as the new permit coordinator, which was a new position that was created after the retirement of Maria Johnson. So some highlights for the Village Hall General Fund. Village Hall includes admin, legal, central services, the board, community development, and finance. We have proposed a $2.4 million budget, which is about 23% of the entire budget. You'll see we've included the addition of an admin intern, and then you'll also notice we have our contractual services, which are the usual, Lauterbach and Amon, our attorney, as well as Prescient, who is our IT services. And then we've also made a note here of economic development initiatives. So within the budget this year, we have included a payment, which is from the previously approved share tax, sales tax shared agreement. Oh my goodness, sorry. I've had too much coffee. Jeez. And that was with Thornton, so we anticipate beginning paying on that this upcoming fiscal year. And then we've also included $15,000 in the budget for a potential membership with Naturally McHenry County.
Brittany, where would the intern come from, do you think?
Sorry, what do you?
Where will we find an intern?
So we would look at students in their master's program. I would anticipate that we could put that on websites like ILCMA. Yeah.
Something we've had before?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I think it's a great idea.
It's awesome. It's really, it lessens the burden on the rest of the staff. The projects are fed to this. And we had, what was her name, the last one we had? It was like 3 years ago.
The last one was Patrick Lang.
Oh, Patrick, yeah. And then before that was,
I wasn't here.
oh, yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, you were just,
they
you were just born.
So they spend the summer like typical interns?
No, they work all year round.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
There's
We
some
did,
flexibility in
a
that.
lot of them are working on their master's degree.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, that's right. That's their sixth.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
And then we'll switch to police. We had 2 new hires, Dawn as a records assistant, and then our new officer, Kyle, who we met previously, and will be finishing the academy, I believe, at the end of April. So police, again, no surprise, is a large portion of our budget at 56%. You'll see we've proposed $5.9 million for their portion of the budget. With that, we've included 1 additional patrol officer. So that would put them at 27 sworn staff. And of course, we'll continue to pay our contractual services, which is our portion of CCOM, our portion of our social worker, as well as the crossing guards. Here is
Can
just,
I ask a quick question? The crossing guards, I know I've mentioned this before, but does the village pay for the entire thing, or is there a cost sharing with the school?
it's a cost sharing
Cost
with
sharing.
the school.
Okay, what's our portion? Do you know, like how percentage-wise? Is it like a 50/50?
It's 50%.
It's 50/50.
It is, okay, thank you.
Thank you. So here you can just see the proposed wages. There is an increase here. Part of that would be due to the new officer, and it's also due to we'll be entering into a new contract with the FOP. And then here's just to show that police pension fund contribution, as was presented to the board previously. We do have a slight increase to our contribution, and of course, we will just continue to follow what is proposed.
Can I ask a question about that? Just, so if I remember the slide that you covered about the anticipated income decrease, what is it, like somewhere 5 to 8% or something like that? Roughly?
Yeah, it was about 8% for the expense decrease, yep.
Okay, so let's just say, 8%, and I'm looking at these numbers. This is an increase to the police pension fund. I know this has been something we've talked about a lot. In my mind, at a time when our revenues are decreasing, to increase the contribution to the police pension fund is maybe something to think about. I can see that if we set a percentage of revenues going into the police pension fund, then it's always going to be even. But when we start to have stress on our income, to put more money in the pension fund is something that I think, I don't know, it's just something to think about. Because if we don't transfer it from the general fund to put it in there, and we leave it in the general fund, we can always put it into the police pension fund at some point in the future, correct?
Right.
So, I guess I kind of look at it as our general fund is the reserve. It covers an awful lot of stuff. And if we throw more into any one particular area, then we don't have as big of a pool to cover multiple things. And we're not the only, we've talked about this police pension fund for crying out loud. It seems like ever since you and I've known each other. We're not the only community with that issue. And at some point, if the regulations are loosened, then we've put a lot of money into a place where then all of a sudden that contribution could decline because they loosen the regulation.
Well, we're kind of bound by By 2040, we have to be, I think, through the state statute, we have to be 90% funded.
Right.
This board elected to be 100% funded. So if we took that away, we're working through the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus to work with our legislators to come up with a different mechanism to help finance this, like the LGDF, which we're currently at 6.13% or something like that when we're supposed to be at 10. So that's all I do every day, all day, is like work with the legislators and the caucus to come up with ideas to fund this. We're going to have a big meeting down in Springfield coming up with regard to this. You know, the state always says that they're going to lower our property taxes, but we all know that the state can't lower our property taxes. The only way they really can is by the way how they fund schools. And I don't ever see that in my lifetime changing. So we're working with them because now the state has all this extra money. We're like, okay, fine, it's now time to give it back to the municipalities and the people that pay this. So we're kind of negotiating with them. They're saying, okay, well, what are you going to do? What are we going to get for this? It's a give and take. What are you going to get? Say, all right, well, you give us our 10% LGDF. The municipalities that can, which a majority have agreed to, the 275 municipalities that we represent, a lot of that would go towards police pension, would lessen the burden on our general fund. So these are the things that we're working on. But as much as I would love to decrease the contribution, well, we can't. First of all, the state says that we have to move forward by 2040. One of the things that we're working on too is maybe pushing out that date from 2040 to another date, maybe another 5 years. It would lessen the burden a little bit more. But now, actually, the police pension board said that they're working on they're willing to kind of negotiate the big thing, because with the consolidations and all that's going on right now, there are remedies for what's moving forward. It all depends. Everything is in flux right now. We're bombarding all of our legislators about this and how we can help fund these things, because it's a big number.
Well, and all of that, I mean, I understand what you're talking about, and I've been part of the vote to get to be 100%. But, hypothetically, you could be at 60% on December 31, 2039, and have $15 million in your general fund, and the next day transfer it, and you'd be in compliance, right?
I don't know how that would work.
I mean, I don't think they're telling you have to be a certain percentage every year, are they? It's just that the 2040 date is there.
Yeah.
I guess my
Well, I think it's just how we've decided to do this is we chip away at it. I mean, that we can't come up with these. We've talked about financing, to get where we were. We talked about that before, but the board chose to do what we're doing right now.
And again, I'm only bringing it up that if, there are a lot of things that impact the revenue that we get. We talked about last time, electric cars and our MFT dollars could be falling off, blah, blah, blah. So at a point where, and maybe it's just 1 year, it's not a trend yet, but if we're sitting here next year and we see another year where our revenues decline by 8%, then should we be increasing?
I apologize, but the 8% was our expenditures
Yeah.
decreasing. It was not our revenue.
I thought I saw a slide that said our revenues decreased.
So there's a slight decrease in our revenue here. I've got it on the slide, part of which is ARPA dollars. And like Kelly mentioned, there's we'll call it like the regular revenue we receive does have a slight decrease as well. But some of the things we could point to is police fines this year. We received quite a bit more compared or than what we may get next year related to larger cases that we finally finished. And then I think we've just taken a more conservative approach, but if you actually look at the slide here, it's 10.6 for FY23, and then we're projecting, 10.5. So it's not a huge decrease in the revenue between those 2 years. And if you look at the overall trend here, we have gone up quite a bit. I mean, FY21, we weren't even hitting 9 million.
So they're
And if you
flattening
look at-
out, and
Go ahead.
and your point's very well taken. We do have to measure that against all the different buckets, to
Exactly.
that analogy
That's the
that we
only
had
damn
before.
thing. Yeah.
Precisely, and balancing that with the approach that we do have this target that we need to meet with the overall police pension. But noting that we have a recommendation from our financial experts that lay out what that amount should be, obviously we'll year to year look at it and look at those buckets and how they balance each other. But knowing that we do need to make a point, and I think the direction has been to follow those recommendations so that we don't fall behind. A little bit of a difference each year may help the bottom line that one year, but if you get too far behind, it does really become challenging, if not impossible, to catch up.
Yeah.
So it's again, that balancing act that I think you're alluding to is something we do each year, but basing it upon the recommendations from the financial side versus the revenues. But as Courtney mentioned, the revenue trends are looking very, very positive. I think Kelly had mentioned it's a very conservative number with some other factors going on economically in the world. So it's a slight decrease here, looking at the brown bars on the chart there. But I would say we're looking at a conservative flat revenue change from last year to this year, but it is a good and healthy improvement over what this village normally sees historically, and not just the last 5 years, but the last 10.
Well, if you look at, and just for the record, Eric, Courtney, and myself met with Trustee Walrath. We went over this before he wasn't able to be here today. But what I emphasize when you look at that $10.6 million that we have right now, for many, many, many years, we were between $8 and $8.5 million. So we are trending up, not as much as we want, but we have things in the pipeline right now that are going to shore that up. You know, with the new Thorntons, we got, you know, the new development that's coming in, the dispensary, you know, all these different revenues that will be coming in. And then when we get further into the slides, there are some opportunities that the board can look at to help bolster that up, to maybe bolster up our capital funds or whatever that we can do. So, you know, as we get through this, keep that in mind too. Okay.
And that's how we're highlighting that, yeah, while things they're trending much better than, say, 10 years ago, while flat, they're trending well, and that does support the proposals we have in place. Everything we're showing here, whether it's police pension or the staffing options that we're considering here, they are sustainable. And that's kind of the positive message we have here, is that these buckets that we're juggling are they're not infinite, but they are in a positive position right now, and you'll see more of that as Courtney and Kelly continue the slides here.
And of course, just, you know, the staff is proposing a $1.5 million transfer to capital. If that's something that the board is not interested in, or, you know, less than that amount, or that's something we can also explore.
Well, if you remember, in years past, the board made a decision with that fund balance. We transferred, correct me if I'm wrong, we transferred some of that to the police pension fund. We bolstered that up a little bit 1 year. So, I mean, that's something that we could do, but we really need to look at our capital funds. I mean, that revenue that we need a revenue source for that.
Yeah.
You know, you look at all, you know, through the CIP, I mean, you look at everything that went on and that we have to do that's coming up. We really need to keep our eye on that. We don't want to fall any further behind.
I think that's really the point
Yeah.
I'm trying to make, that, you know, you can't isolate one piece to continue to try to get ahead of and have everything else go the opposite.
Well, yeah, I get what you're saying with regards to the police pension fund. We're doing exactly what our consultants tell us to do, not a nickel more. This is what they tell us that we have to do. That's what we're going to do. Now, if we were, you know, haphazardly throwing in, you know, an extra $250,000, I wish we could, but then that's something we would say, hey, look, you know what, we're getting a little overzealous.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we'll go to Public Works. We had 2 new hires, Heidi, our part-time office assistant, and Tim, the assistant to the Public Works director. Public Works is 21% of our this is only the general fund portion of Public Works, I should mention, so just the operations and maintenance team. They take up 21% of the budget. We are proposing 1 full-time custodian, so you may remember this fiscal year we had a part-time custodian in the budget. We have found this year that a full-time custodian would be recommended. So the custodian handles this building, the Public Works building, the metro station. This full-time custodian would be able to also assist with cleaning and maintenance at the wastewater treatment plant building as well. So we we definitely could see this, a full-timer having plenty to do.
And in order to meet the service levels that we are expecting for our facilities, and not just because they're shiny and new, such as the building here, but just the expectations that we need for our staff and for our public.
Well, and we want to keep that. We want to keep
Right,
it in
correct.
tip-top shape.
And then we have proposed one seasonal hourly, which would be a summer helper, as we have in the past years. And then also we have put the on-call engineering into the general fund. So that is a cost that for the past numerous years has been in capital fund, and based on our revenues, we have been able to propose putting it back into general fund. So we'll switch over to water and sand. So you'll see the revenue here is at 4.8 million. This is based on the new rates that were approved, and we are proposing to expend 8.5 million, so that would take from some of the water and sand fund balance, which is a very healthy fund balance, of course. And for this year, we're proposing the addition of one utility worker, which again was something the board has heard through the rate study discussion. All of these projects were discussed during the CIP, but just to highlight just the amount of work that will be going into next fiscal year, primarily with the water main replacement program, as well as the lead service replacement program, and quite a bit of capital replacement at the wastewater treatment plant. Quick highlights for the capital projects fund. So again, the board has seen a majority of these projects during the last presentation. I just have two to highlight. So you'll see under regional police training facilities, during the CIP presentation, we had proposed 100,000. Now that the chief, as well as the other municipalities, have worked very hard to figure out the operating costs of the new buildings, we are now proposing 50,000.
Way to go.
Way to go.
It's a proportional amount that's based on the number of personnel that we would be using the firearms range and the training center. It includes assuming some responsibility for personnel that would be assigned by the sheriff's office. They're entitled to capture a certain amount of money from that as well. But you'll see in the near future here an intergovernmental agreement coming your way and a land lease agreement between the county and the village with this as well. But in essence, what we're talking about is the village would be responsible for a little over 7% of the operating budget for that regional training center.
To me, this is a great reflection on our disciplined budget, how we put things out there. We estimate a little bit high, it comes in a little bit low. That's just, positive reflection upon good budgeting planning.
And the other change we have is in the village facility improvements. This is an increase of $30,000. This is due to the construction of the firing range. The fence at Public Works will need to be moved, and with that, we are proposing to move where it's a chemical. Eric, can you just explain what it is?
Certainly. Obviously, the proposed fire range is located on our Public Works facility property. And as is common with construction projects and design projects, you find some field conditions that are slightly different than we anticipated. We had proposed and already knew we were going to be moving some fencing, but it did come in conflict with some of the electrical and water lines with our chemical tanks for our winter operations. So it's our winter chemicals. Those tanks actually are in they're very old, and I think they were installed actually as secondhand refurbished units. So instead of just relocating them with this project, it made sense to actually look at them and replace them at the same time. So this additional cost in our CIP is to not just move them as we anticipated, but replace them as well. But we'll be doing that in-house, so the cost increase was approximately $30,000, I believe. So we're controlling that cost by doing some of the work ourselves.
So those are the only changes to the capital projects fund since the last time the board saw these projects. And we'll switch over to parking.
All right, just some quick parking fund highlights here. Those top three, the station landscaping, the south commuter lot fencing, and the operating expenses we saw in the CIP. The only difference here is the retainage for the parking lot resurfacing. This was a prior project that we're carrying over the retainage piece of it into next fiscal year. And just based on the state of the fund, and we're not proposing any major, capital projects in the fund, we are able to sustain those costs in the next year and not have to do a transfer as we have in the past from the general fund. So this really ties everything together that we've talked about. This is a summary of all the funds. So here you can see where we're projected to end fiscal year 23 for our fund balance numbers, what our budgeted revenues and expenses are for each of the funds. You'll see the transfer that we're proposing from general to capital projects, and then where we're anticipating ending fiscal year 24. As Courtney had mentioned too, I'll point out water and sand, that healthy fund balance, which is why we're able to use, some of that to cover the expenses of the 8.5 million. Other thing I want to point out too, the only transfer we're proposing is from general to capital projects. That means that we're able to conserve those land conservancy and building fund dollars for future years, maybe when we're not able to do as high of a transfer from the general fund. So I think that's great that we'll be able to utilize those dollars in future years for capital projects.
Quick question, just for the general public, can you explain TIF number 2, how we're what we're doing with it, because we're taking it all out?
Yep, so that'll be, the anticipation is to be closing that for next fiscal year. So we'll receive some tax dollars of $39,000, and then the $229,000 is actually going to be surplus that is going to go back to the county to be redistributed.
I was just saying for the general public, I think that's a good point to highlight.
When you say redistribute, it goes back to the other taxing bodies?
Correct,
just for
yes,
the record.
yes.
Any questions about this slide?
No.
So at our CIP workshop, there was interest in potential discussion for new or additional revenue sources. So just a reminder, only for discussion today. If the board wishes to discuss at a further meeting or take action, then we can certainly do so at a later time. But just kind of want to go through some of these sources that you guys have seen in the past and put actual figures to these sources. So first one at the top is the non-home rule sales tax. That $650,000 estimated increase in annual revenue is assuming 1%. That is the highest we can go, up to 1%. 0.25% would be approximately 167,000. 0.5%, about 325, and then 0.75% would be approximately 500,000. We did look in surrounding communities. They are home rule, but everyone except for Crystal Lake is using 1% for that home rule sales tax. Crystal Lake is using 0.75%. We have the natural gas utility tax. That's a 5% tax. That's approximately 175 increase in annual revenue. Cable franchise fee, currently at 4%. If we did an increase to 5%, it's approximately 70,000 increase in our revenue. So just a note on this one, the Comcast agreement is expiring at the end of this fiscal year, and they've actually put in their proposal 5%. If we were to just, go that way, the Comcast portion of it is approximately 55,000 increase. AT&T would be approximately 15,000.
So this is an item, as Kelly mentioned, we will be seeing at a very near future board meeting, because we do need to enact and negotiate a final extension to the franchise agreement. So this actually does bring up a great opportunity for considering that if this is one of the elements of new revenue sources or adjusted revenue sources that the board would wish us to explore, we do have, timing-wise, an opportunity here with the current contract expiring. As Kelly mentioned, the Cable Act does limit all municipalities to a maximum of 5%, and it appears that most municipalities do position themselves at that level with their franchise agreements. So we did want to get some feedback if there was a desire for us to utilize that number with our negotiations and our update of the franchise agreement coming up with Comcast, and then with the future one with AT&T, it could be taken at a separate date. But yeah, timing-wise, we do have that one coming before you at one of the next meetings. So as we do this review of the current agreement, I would like some feedback if there's a desire for us to consider that. The options, I believe, are limited to those that actually provide the actual cable services that meet the definition of that act. So these would only apply to the two, at least in the area that are currently providing services to Cary.
Is there a streaming tax for some of those other ones?
That is another option that's out there. However, I think we have researched this one in the past when we were looking at other revenue sources previously. But as a non-home rule community, that one is not one that's available to us at this point unless the legislation changes.
And there's only 2 municipalities that have that now, Evanston and Chicago.
Does the non-home rule sales tax go to referendum for vote, or is that board action?
It's referendum.
It's a referendum.
Yes.
Isn't it Wakanda now that's looking at that for, there's a community around here that's looking for non-home rule. I saw signs up about it.
Bull Valley, I believe, is another community that was exploring it. Bull Valley?
Bull Valley.
I mean, I'd like to see how those go. When you look at this, the one we're talking about now with cable is the smallest one. So, I mean, if you're going to enact something, to me, it seems like you want to have something a lot more impactful than 70 grand. That's my opinion.
I agree.
It's, well, sales tax doesn't just affect people that live here, it's everybody that buys things here.
Right.
Anyone that
And
shops
then-
here?
Courtney, you want to talk about what's taxed, but that, what you talked about before, about what's the word I'm looking for?
Yes, so
What's
it
excluded from that?
it does not include grocery, food, or prescription medical drug costs.
The home rule thing.
Yeah, the non-home rule
Sales
sales.
tax.
Non-home. And then I just did a Google about Wakanda. They are actually looking to, they have it to be home rule.
Yeah.
So that's
Right.
what's on the, yeah.
Right.
Barrington just did that. They passed through referendum to become home rule.
I have a question then. So with the non-home rule sales tax did you research who's gone to referendum with them and what percentage passed on average?
For non-home rule, so the communities around here, right, are home rule, so that was kind of difficult to find. I think the closest one to us maybe was South Elgin, actually, and I'd have to go back and look and see.
I was just wondering
Yeah.
what their success rate was.
Yeah.
Well, and then there's also, you got to remember too, there's also a cost to do this,
To go to referendum.
to go to
so-
referendum. And it's an education, time commitment by staff and elected officials to educate what this would, like Rick Walworth and I were talking about it with staff, that one of the benefits to this, when you look at our CIP and you look at what's needed, if we were to enact something like this, or, if you're going to die on the sword for something that's going to be well worth the fight, that we would say that whatever this 1% is would go strictly towards capital improvements or roads or something. Because whenever we do a survey, the last 3 surveys that we did, the top 3 things that people were concerned about and wanted were roads. And if we were to say, look, this is what's going to go, this doesn't affect your property taxes, you're going to go to the store anyway. When you go to other municipalities, they're already paying that tax. So when you go to Crystal Lake, you're already paying that tax. So I think that it's something that we should have a real healthy discussion about.
Are we the lowest sales tax in this area already?
Pretty
Close.
much, I mean, that we're at 7%.
Well, since we don't have a non-home rule sales tax or a home rule sales tax, obviously, we are basically on the same playing field as other communities with the same status as us. The other reason you don't see very many non-home rule sales taxes out there with other communities might be because we are probably among the largest of the non-home rule towns in this area. Most non-home rule communities are actually significantly smaller than Cary. So it is not so much an apples to apples sort of comparison from that perspective. But I do want to highlight that, that I think all the feedback we've heard here, we appreciate all that. And we will use that with our future discussions with regards to this topic. Also, just kind of recalling what we had in our capital improvement program presentation. There were several funds, obviously, that have no revenue sources: vehicle and equipment, land conservancy, and then the roadway maintenance from the motor fuel tax that was mentioned. You might recall from that slide that the target funding amount per year to maintain our roadway network at our current pavement condition index level was about $1.6 million would be needed per year. Relative to that, our current MFT allotment that we receive each year is about $730,000. So there's about a $900,000 or so difference just in roadway alone, which is why it's kind of good to frame, if you are going to look at any potential revenue sources to add or consider changing that piece of the pie, just for that one topic right there of $900,000, obviously is not met by any one source here. So if, obviously, any help in that regard for future roadway maintenance is a positive, but even the small amounts with cable franchise fees or natural gas utility tax, yes, in and of themselves, they're very small pieces of the pie, but every piece does add up and gets us closer to that target point, just in case one or all of these aren't going to be considered in the future. Every little bit will add up to a street paved each year, possibly. Or ideally, you chip into more of that $900,000 delta, you hit neighborhoods of streets paved each year that wouldn't have been otherwise. So just for context, I want to point that out.
So 4 of those 5 we can do. It's the non-home rule that we have to go to referendum. Right?
Yeah, Kelly, if you wouldn't mind maybe kind of outlining which ones are more by board action relative to the other implementation approaches.
Yeah, so, and kind of, so I know we also like labeled the difficulty of implementation, those first 3 are low, and obviously with non-home rule sales tax would be referendum. The other 2, it would just be board action and then administered by the provider. Vehicle sticker and eating establishment tax, which we didn't really go over yet, those would be high difficulty. Vehicle sticker, that number does not include software costs that would be, needed to implement. Eating establishment tax that we looked at too, none of the other surrounding communities have that in place. I did talk to somebody who came from I think it was Schaumburg, who does, and said it was an administrative nightmare essentially to put that into place also. But those would be like board actions and then the implementation piece of that, so.
Well, from my perspective, we talked about a home rule for
Well, that's, if I,
15 years.
well, if I may, through the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, we're also working to lower the population to allow us to become, by statute. Right now it's the 25,000 is the magic number. And, we're talking about, we're fiscally responsible, we're healthy, we're a thriving community, we're growing. What separates us from 25,000 doesn't make any sense.
No.
It's an arbitrary number. So that's also, it's on our legislative agenda to work with that. We call it self-determination. So we're able to make these decisions for the best of our individual communities.
How realistic is that going to happen?
They're willing to listen, and I think it all goes back to bargaining and working what's, it's, the LGDF is a huge consideration right now. We are putting all of our resources in there. I have meetings every single day about it. And when you look at that delta and what the state is withholding from the municipalities, it's like a couple $2 billion. And you look at what we get. What is Kelly? What is our what is our LGDF revenue every year with this at 6.1? It's like $2.5 million or something. It's like that. Think about it if we added another 4% to that. So that would help us with the police pension fund costs and that. So we present this in a way of responsible spending. That this is what we're doing. You're the ones that are doing all these unfunded mandates. The police. The cams the body worn cameras that they have to wear, the maintenance of that, the software, all that.
Storage.
It's the storage. It's those continual expenses that will only get higher and higher. So we have to look at things in a more responsible way. No one likes talking about a new sale. I don't, but this kind of levels the sales. The non-home rule sales tax option would be a challenge to do, but it would level the playing field with the other municipalities that are already enacting it. So, I don't think, when you do it on a case-by-case basis, a case-by-case spend, it's not like, say, you're going to add this to your tax bill, that's forever. You have a choice to go, you're going to either go here, or you're going to go to Crystal Lake, or go to Barrington, or Algonquin. You're going to pay that anyway.
So what's the next step if we want to take that?
And I think that could be that would be a part of a separate discussion. I think what we're hearing today is that there is interest to have that next level discussion on what the maybe appropriate choices would be to get more information on, and we can provide you with those details of what the next steps would be.
Personally, I
think we
think
do.
you put that as a high priority item. I mean, we can't wait.
Well, we have time to do it because
an
it
election
has to, we
cycle.
have to do the next election cycle, which is 2025. So we have some time to really sink our teeth into it and figure out what's the best. And hopefully, maybe in that time, the state will help us with that, and we can become a home rule community, that we can, have that self-determination that each municipality is looking for.
I still think it behooves us to have the discussion even now, even
Right.
if we're not doing something, because I think we
Especially
need to know what does it include. You're talking about what doesn't include, what does it include? Because I think the time to start talking about it and getting information and education to people is now, even if it's not for 2 years that we do something. I think if you just try and overload someone in 2 years, it's just a slow type of education to me is the repetition is the best way to get people understanding it all, including everyone on the board. To understand how does this impact everything?
I have another question, 2 questions actually. Dispensary income, when will we discuss where that money is allocated to and what fund?
I think that could be encompassed in a revenue discussion in the short term, and that's also, I think, what we're seeing consensus.
Well,
is
it's a
that it needs to
guesstimation
be a
right
short-term
Well, I know,
discussion,
it's, right,
yeah.
but we
Well, we
gotta
should-
kind of decide where we're going, and I have
Yes.
one other thing that's probably not very popular, but, so we're talking about small pieces of pie and adding to it like $70,000 is money. What about loosening the gaming requirements to full restaurants? I know we've had, obviously, parties interested in adding gaming. It's income. It's, I don't know, it's just a thought.
What do you, I'm sorry, just.
Oh, just
what do you mean,
instead of
saying for
having a
anyone that has
full-service
a-
restaurant?
No, not necessarily gaming parlor, but there's obviously a couple bars in this town that have asked for it, and we won't grant it because of our regulations. What about changing them? It's everywhere now. I'm not saying gas stations either, but couldn't we change some of that? Income's income. You're not going to these places because gaming's there. Most people.
But I think what, in the past discussions, I mean, we've come full circle with this. We've actually done a complete 180
Yeah, I know.
with this. And I think that's just I think it just waters it down. People, if they're going to go to one place, then they go to another one, they're just not going to go to that place, they're going to go to the other one. So I think that if you look at the gaming revenues, you could see where a majority of
It's spent, yeah,
is
absolutely.
spent. And I think it's, I look at it as it's a privilege, not a right. It's what the board has decided, how we want our community to be and what we're looking at. But I'm always willing to have a conversation
It was
about it.
just a thought.
Yeah, I think there'll be, there's definitely, I think, the direction for staff to have a near-term discussion on revenues and the different facets to it, not just the options you see here, but other dimensions like that. So we will put that in our calendars for the near term. Again, the only other point for the short term that we do need some direction on as we negotiate the franchise agreement renewal for Comcast and eventually AT&T, is this 4 to 5% keep it where it's at, or do you want us to look at possibly bringing us back to where the Cable Act does allow?
I think we should at least look at bringing it back to what the Cable Act allows.
We were at 5%
Correct.
for years and years and years. And then it was reduced.
dropped
2016.
Yeah.
And did I hear you say that the surrounding communities are
Are all at
typically at 5?
All at
There's no
5.
reason not to be. Yeah.
So we're hearing consensus
I'm fine with that too.
Go ahead.
I do like the non-rural sales tax. I like what Ellen had to say about education. I like going toward roads. I would not be in favor of the natural gas utility. I'm fine with the cable. No for vehicle stickers, please.
Please, no.
And it's hard to do, but if we could figure out the eating establishment tax, again, that's a luxury, so I look at that as, and more people use it, other than just Cary residents.
That's why I said gaming too.
I would actually
Free
be
choice.
interested to see the gaming as well. If they were already having it at restaurants and you can have it these other places, bars that don't have food, I don't know, I don't think it's that big a deal if it's already in the restaurants.
Or we can reduce the amount of game machines they could have. There's
It's hard to
options.
take away.
Yeah.
Once you approve it, it's hard to take
Oh,
away.
no, in a just a parlor kind of setup, they can have whatever. I'd be willing to have that discussion.
I agree.
We can have Community Development Director Rex Simmons put something together.
No, I love it.
Excellent.
Okay. Well, thank you for the candid feedback
Ryan, welcome back.
on this topic. And I guess circling back, if you can go back one slide, Courtney. And with that, are there any other comments or questions with regards to the fiscal year '24 budget? Obviously,
I
the
just think
revenues
it's
don't
very
affect it.
impressive. I think that, I commend the staff. You know, we do a great job with having these disciplined budgets, with going through, making sure that we're online for keeping the village in a good financial position. So, well done to everybody. That's my comments.
Is everybody okay with what we've been discussing here?
Yes.
I have a quick question. We were talking about the pension stuff, and I was thinking, do you recall where we started at that? It was a pretty low percent, and where we're at now?
Well, this is my talking point when we talked to the legislature about this. When I first became mayor in 2013, our contribution to the police pension fund was like around $450,000. Now, this next year, it's going to be $1.2 million out of using the exact same money that we're using out of our general fund money. So that resonates with them, that they see that that's an enormous burden. That's 3 times what we did in 10 years. That's outrageous. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, but I remember when we first had that discussion, it was pretty low kind of funding to get it to there. So I was just curious, like, now that we've been doing it all these years, what's the percentage now versus when we started?
So you're asking maybe
Where we're
what percent
funded?
funded we are.
Yes,
Oh,
percent
yes.
funded, thank you.
Okay.
We can provide that in
Okay.
a future update. I don't know if we have it handy.
I think we're almost, aren't we like at 62%, 55, or it's.
Kelly wants to double check
it's
if her
higher.
number's accurate
Come on, Kelly.
before she goes on the record.
No, I will double check on that.
Exactly.
Yeah. It'll be in the actuarial evaluation that,
Exactly.
was approved in October, so.
But we're on pace to meet the goal by 2040.
We are. Actually, we're going to exceed the goal because the state statute is 9%.
Oh,
We'll
okay.
be at-
We're
we'll
going
be
in
at
100.
100, that's right. So-
Okay, is there any other comments or questions for staff? Questions? Okay, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned at 9:53. Yeah, awesome job. Thank you. Kelly, well